Much. So now I need to switch my role a bit. This is my third time actually presenting here, and this is, I think, the fifth time that NXP presents at this event. And I think the topic in the past years has always been imaging radar, high-performance radar. And our presentation in the past have always been very closely linked to the development of image radar technology. And I will continue on this path today. And at a time when actually the certainty of a global rollout of the image radar technology is accelerating, and the certainty has never been higher than today, even though it is not without any challenges. And we do think that the challenges lies not only on the performance, but actually more importantly, as also what Andre just actually addressed, it's actually about scalability, and it is about efficiency in the solution space. These are the key enablers to make sure that the technology can actually be adopted on the wide scale. And of course, I'm going to talk about all these three elements during my presentation today. So let's first have a look at the chart here on the left-hand side. So basically, what we see here is that the level 2, 3, 4, and 5 cars combined are going to accelerate. The penetration rate are going to accelerate. And it is this high accelerated penetration of the autonomous driving vehicles that will drive the demand or strong demand in the coming years for the image radar. Because of the inherent capabilities of image radar, being able to accurately measure the speed, measure the distance, but also continuously improving a resolution in any or almost all weather and environment conditions. If you look into the two curves actually on the graph, the blue one is the penetration rate of these autonomous vehicles until the end of 2030. And on the global average scale, and the orange one is the curve for China. We see that by end of this decade, the penetration rate of radar of level 2 plus up to level 5 vehicles will be around 50%. And they will actually grow fast, while the level 1, level 2 penetration will decrease accordingly. What this curve also tells us is that apparently or obviously, the trend in China is slightly different from the other regions. This is clearly what we have actually been able to sense and observe, that the Chinese OEMs at this moment, they perceive a different mindset in terms of technology deployment. They are much more open and ready to try out the new technologies. They want to utilize the new technologies to actually differentiate on a wider scale against their competition. And for that, they are actually asking for something that is more cost efficient, right? That has to perform sufficiently well, but it has to be cost efficient. And this is very much in the high contrast to what has happened on the global market. If you look at the established market in Europe, in the US, the image radar technology still is a kind of a niche application as of today, right? If you look at actually the OEMs, the premium OEMs, they apply the image radar only to the premium cars. And but then, if you look at the Chinese OEMs, we last year together, I think, with our customers in China, we had 100% fit rate roll out at a particular OEM. Well, that is at NIO, I will mention, and I mentioned also actually last year. So the mentality is very different. It's very different. So what does that mean? So in summary, we see that actually there is going to be a bifurcated market requirement in terms of the image radar. So on the upper hand, you see, as what we all know, the performance image radar are going to be continuously embraced by the traditional OEMs in the established market, and they're going to use this technology to enable actually autonomous driving up to level 5, and I would say up to by the end of 2030, realistically, I think the OEMs are looking at level 4. And the take rate is moderate, right? Let's be honest with that. While in China, as we speak, things are happening very fast. The Chinese OEMs are not necessarily looking for the level 4 and 5, are much more practical. They want to have a higher penetration rate, and they want to actually cover primary level 2+ and probably level 3. But once again, they want to have a solution that is not the best affordable performance as what the European and US OEMs are asking for, but something that is affordable for the mass. So let's also have a look at the not so long history of the deployment of the image radar. I think the first image radar sensor went into production around 2022 in the OEM, in some of the OEMs here in Europe, and followed by the adoption of the image radar by a robot taxi company in the US, and that then followed by the announcement of some of the premium OEMs about the availability of level 3 services to actually passenger vehicles. And I think that was a topic we discussed, I think, in 2023, in 2024. Examples are BMW, examples are Mercedes. So in those years, things happened actually started with Europe, with US, and last year, NIO, and also its new sub-brand Envo, basically started the first global introduction of the so-called entry-level image radar in mass production. It's a 100% take rate for the entire platform. The effect of this action is that the Chinese consumers or the customers and the other peer OEMs in China, they start to understand much better the benefit of utilizing actually an entry image radar. I think there was a very interesting video. I didn't actually ask for the approval, that's why I don't play this here. That was shown actually by NIO, where actually the car is driving actually in extremely foggy weather, and the system sees cars 50 meters ahead, even though with the naked eyes you see nothing, right? And that now has triggered, as we speak, a handful of primary Chinese OEMs now have determined to adopt the same solution or similar solution in order to come up with a competition in that market. And the next OEM production targeted as early as the second half of this year already. So basically, in the coming years, we're expecting that more Chinese OEMs will adopt this technology as a front-facing radar, and also, based on the NXP solution, we will have the first entry image radar adopted by a robot taxi company in 2026. Beyond 2026, beyond 2027, starting from 28, again, I think this is a new period where, again, we expect to see that this technology will be spread actually globally and driven again by the established market, where the traditional OEMs are actually looking for the second generation performance image radar. That again is driven by the need of actually introduce an enhanced level 3 features and initial rollout of the level 4 passenger vehicles. So we are very confident and we are very optimistic about how the image radar technology will be widely penetrated or widely adopted by the OEMs on the global scale. But then the question is that what does it mean, right, to really support or this global rollout of the technology on a global scale? Let's have a look that in the 2022, the first performance image radar went into production with a 12:16 configuration with an FPGA and with limited processing capabilities, with a limited temperature range, with a high cost. And that went to production with the premium car OEMs, but a limited production quantities. If we look at the current generation that is in production today, and there are two flavors or two configurations. For the performance radar, for the performance image radar, it's a typical 12:16 configuration, and the processing runs already on a dedicated image radar processor, such as NXP's S32R45, combined with up to 4 3x4 MMIC devices. And that is certainly driven or being requested by the traditional OEMs, while in China, the bottom 6x8 configuration is what I mentioned, based on NXP's S32R41, which is also a capable image radar processor, but it is also much more affordable. So we're really optimized actually the resources to give a better balance between the performance and cost. And this image radar MCU can actually then cascade 2 times the 3x4 MMIC, so it's a 6x8 configuration, and that is in production as mentioned. But then looking forward, right, fast forward to the 2028. To 2028, things become even more interesting. So for China, for the entry image radar segment, we believe that will still be the main request from the Chinese OEMs, but they are going to do actually a performance step up from today's 6x8 solution to an 8x8 solution. Remember, their strategy is wide deployment, cost performance ratio is important, while for the establishing a market in Europe and in the US, we see that this evolution leads to 2 further segmentations. So on the one hand, some of the OEMs prefer to have a not too big step up from today's 12T/16 to the 16/16, while we see some of the OEMs are definitely asking for the best affordable performance that can be enabled by the technology available at that point of time. And there clearly there is a push and a pull, let's say, for a 24x24 configuration. So overall, no matter if we are talking about actually the Chinese OEMs or if we are talking about actually the European OEMs or the US OEMs, no matter it's an 8x8 entry or it's a 24x24 performance, what I think the customers or the OEM customers looking for is performance, but it is not only performance. And I think very often, not very often, but almost in all the discussions of real RFQ, RFI opportunities, customers actually pay more attention into the integration challenges. And that is, next to the performance discussion. Then, if you look at the configurations we have lined out for the 2028, I'm sorry, there's something actually wrong with the graphic, the missing 24x24 configuration. I hope this will come up. So last year, as I said, right, we talked about here actually the 6x8 sensor that was actually developed by Simpro, and the sensor received the Tech.AD award last year and went in production at NEO. And today I would like to focus then, the remaining of my presentation on the performance image radar, on this new emerging need of the 24x24, right? So then the question probably from you, the first one is that, why do we have yet another new configuration? And why 24x24, right? So first, let me say why actually the new configuration of the 24x24, stepping up from the 16x16. I think for those who are very familiar with the radar technologies, we know that very often the most frequently quoted parameters or the system KPIs are the range, are the resolutions. But we all know that if you look into the details of what the OEMs are asking for the next generation enhanced level 3, level 4 use cases, then of course talking about these 2 parameters will not be sufficient. So clearly, the OEMs are actually, for the enhanced level 3, level 4 use cases, they put actually a much higher emphasis than ever on smaller object detections. And examples are detecting a tire up to 80 meters actually on the highway environment, and detecting a person that is standing very close to a parked car at a certain distance, certainly over 100 or 120 meters. And also the need of properly, clearly detect, but also resolve actually a truck, for example, entering a tunnel. So all these actually use cases would basically point to a higher requirement for, of course, resolution separability, certainly, especially in the elevation direction, but more importantly, also on sensitivities and dynamic range that have not been discussed so far that much. But with these more stringent use cases, these two parameters will become even more important. And to support the improvement of these parameters, certainly having a higher number of channels would be very helpful. Then, of course, the next question is, yeah, but then only 24 by 24, right? If a higher number of channels are better, why not going higher for that? And I think there are actually a couple of factors related. And technically, basically, for radar, especially for image radar, a very key topic is about actually is about coding schemes, right? Typically, if you want to have a high-performance radar, you want to actually enable simultaneous transmission on many transmitters, if not all transmitters. But then, of course, on the receiver side, you need to have the capability of separate the signals from all the channels. And if you have too large number of simultaneous transmitting transmitters, then, of course, you need a very high, actually, speed ADC on the receiver side. That, again, leads to the higher cost. That, again, leads to a higher power consumption, which makes, actually, the solution impractical. Not only for the mimic side, but also on the processing side, because you have much more data to process. And then, of course, alternative is to give up, the DD MIMO, the Doppler division MIMO, and that basically enables in the simultaneous transmitters. And that would be actually the TD MIMO, the time division. And we all know that with the time division, there are actually quite of undesired actually limitations or the side effects introduced. Therefore, it's not really being considered as a practical or as a superior solution. So we do think that the DE MIMO is the way to go, and there you have to make a smart balance between the number of channels and the performance that you want to achieve. So with that, once again, to achieve that, you need to actually plan things carefully. It cannot be an afterthought. What do I mean with that? Again, I want to talk about performance, but I really want to actually divert our focuses on the non-performance factors. That is the integration, right? It is the size of the sensor, it is the cost of the sensor, and it is the power consumption, especially when the electric vehicles becoming more prevalent. We hear actually from the OEMs effects like there's not going to be any airflow in the bumper of the electric vehicles, and any additional power consumption would reduce mileage per charge. So that's why actually all these parameters are equally important, sometimes if not more important than performance, depends on whom you discuss with from the OEM side. But then question is, what are the things we can do, right? As I said, we really need to actually tackle this topic from a holistic view, from all different aspects and domains. And a few of that, actually, I would like to mention here. First of all, very importantly, is to do a smart selection of the process technology for the underlying chipset. Using a too old, actually, process technology, of course, leads to a high power consumption, which is not of our interest, while, of course, going to a too low node is too costly to be accepted by the OEMs. Secondly, I think what we can really do, because the mimic device, the transceiver devices of the image radar is, takes a large percentage of the total system power consumption. So we should try to actually, on the one hand, actually increase the integration of the number of channels, for example, doubling the number of channels to, for example, 8 by 8. And at the same time, if you double the number of channels, you do not really have the freedom to double actually the power consumption. So you have actually to double the power efficiency to make sure that the 8 by 8, for example, the consumption will be on the ballpark as the 3 by 4 today. And by doing so, of course, we have a much higher chance to actually come up with a solution that is, more affordable, that delivers the performance needed. But also some similarly actually, let's say, trivial aspects like the packaging design of the mimic IC, right? How you're going to lay out your actually the launchers, and how you're going to do actually the ball map. that again would have impact on the PCB designs, right? Determines on number of PCBs, a number of layers of the PCB, number of layers of your 3D waveguide antennas. And of course, besides the MMIC devices, the MCU efficiency improvement is also something that we need to take into the consideration. So having that said, so NXP currently, we're of course working on the next generation image radar chipset. So we are following more or less actually the path I mentioned, right? We are actually on the one hand developing actually an 8x8 MMIC that is going to consume more or less the same power consumption as today's 3x4. And that would actually then help us to significantly reduce the component count, because you need actually half of the MMIC ICs on the one hand, and because the number of less MMICs, you need actually less of the PMIC ICs. That would help us, as I said, we have done actually calculation. If we would do actually the same design compared to using today's component, then actually we would be able to save at least 30% of the power consumption. Talking about actually image radar sensors, typically it's about 20 watt actually power consumption of today, then 30% is something that you cannot ignore. And we are very confident that we can come up with image radar sensor that in the worst case, the power consumption will not exceed the 20 watt, which is absolutely the worst case, the number that we have received actually from various OEMs. And I mentioned about low-cost PCB and antenna manufacturing. That has to do with the special packaging technologies that we're going to use. And last but not least, it's the scalability. Scalability probably less interesting for the OEMs in the first side, more interesting for the tier ones, because you want to develop actually a global platform serves not only actually the European market, but probably the China market as well. And here, of course, the scalable solution will minimize actually the R&D cost, especially the software development cost. At the end of the day, that would have a positive impact on OEMs who are looking at the global market. So what we did is that while the ICs are in development, we did, however, already a demo for demonstrating the capability of the 24x24 sensor. And let me make a disclaimer here. This is a sensor that is being developed by 5 of the colleagues in 4 months of time. Right? From the hardware design to the antenna design, 3D waveguide antenna design, to the software implementation. The software implementation is a plain FFTs. There's no super resolution applied. We didn't have the time because we had a deadline for the CES demo. So we did demo this at the CES, and I would like to show this today with a few videos. And it's about actually 4 use cases that are being very much asked by the OEMs. So the first is on the highway. I think on the highway, it's about really how much actually the details you can get, right? In this case, you see clearly the guardrail, nice to see, not really challenging, but it starts to become interesting once you see actually the elevated road, right? If you do not actually have the elevation, of course, it's difficult to judge if this is something actually on your way or if this is something that is not relevant. And I think another actually important aspect of the highways, of course, about the range. And to be honest, I don't think range is really actually a challenge anymore. Here, actually, we're talking about 300 meters. We didn't really optimize. I would expect for the next generation, we're talking about at least 400 meters. And also talking about the range, it's not only about the range of the cars, but it's more about range detection of a smaller object, which is actually what I'm going to show you in the next use case. It's a VRU and debris detection. And here, we basically have 2 colleagues. One is standing just next to the car, the other is walking towards us, and in front of the car is a tire. You probably don't see this yet. And we didn't notice that there was a hydrant to the side of the road, but then we realized that actually after the video shooting. And in this case, we could actually identify both colleagues of us, and we certainly could identify the tire as well as the hydrant on the road. The third one is something I like very much. I think somebody mentioned this morning, actually, the urban use case now becomes more important the way forward. And this is somewhere in San Jose, in downtown San Jose, and we're in actually very interesting road cross, where you see how actually the shape of the buildings are being detected very clearly, how these green poles, right, the plastic poles, on the right-hand side of the video are being clearly detected and separated. And of course, all the pedestrians on the far end are being detected. We can even actually detect the traffic light. We actually even can separate that from the rest because of the elevation. And then actually we continued. And on the left-hand side, you see already actually the building. On the left-hand side, you see already the structure of the building, right? You see the different stories. And we have seen the tram. And then when we make a turn again, we will stop at the crossing. You will see all the moving and static objects are very nicely being identified or being actually detected by this sensor. Let me move on. This is my personal favorite. It's a night drive, and I was actually being asked by at CES by some of the known US car makers saying that if we have a camera system, why do we need radar? I said, look, this is actually a perfect a response to that. It was just by chance that we realized that our camera is completely blinded by the headlight of the car from the other direction. And of course, you are talking about level 3 and 4. You have to make sure that the headlight of the car from the opposite direction should not be the reason why you cannot detect or even justify. Here, interesting is we're trying to actually track this scooter in a dark environment into the distance, and you will also see actually the Christmas tree. Right, you see how actually many points that we get actually from the Christmas tree, and now you start to see on the both sides of the road actually the buildings start to emerge. You really see the structure of the buildings. The data is not accumulated. Okay, so there's no accumulation. It is real time. The only processing we did are these bounding boxes by the video agency, but the rest is real time, directly coming out of the radar. And the last one, I know I'm running out of the time, but in 2 minutes I'll finish. But I think this is something I would like to show. Exactly based on this point cloud, we have created a SLAM. Of course, the SLAM is post-processed on a PC. But of course, in the car can be done actually in the HPC, in the central processing part. This is actually the SLAM that is being generated just on the radar point cloud you saw just now. And you see actually the accuracy. You see how much details that you can actually get out of the sensor. And I would say, if you look at the SLAM, it's pretty much LiDAR-like. Even though, as I said, we are not trying to compete with LiDAR. For higher levels, you need redundancy, right? Clearly on that. Then let me move to the last slide. As I said, we actually have brought a car here today, all the way driven from Holland. It's 800 kilometers. Take the opportunity, if you're interested in taking a look of how this sensor performs in reality. My colleagues will be available at the booth to schedule an appointment, and we will make about a 20 minutes drive actually, in the downtown Berlin. And hopefully that can give you a better understanding and impression of what actually a 24 by 24 sensor can enable in the coming years. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And as I said, if you have any questions, I will be around during the break, and we can have further discussions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And yeah, now we are open for questions. Do you have some questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much for this very clear presentation, inspiring presentation. I've one question, so also related with previous presentation. Mm-hmm. I think, so if we go on, so the costs will also be increased because you just add more, sensors and so on. So you want to also emphasize the scalability. So my question is, how to, or you want to share some insights here, how to limit the cost while the performance is increased, because the whole system costs will also increase, yeah? What's your idea, So somehow, at the end of the day, I think cost is most important?
No, that's actually a very good question. I'm really happy to address that. Probably I didn't make that very clear. So as I said, if you look at this chart here, right, on the left-hand side, what is in production today, if you're going to do a 12 by 16 sensor, it's an MCU plus 4 MMIC. The way forward, we're going to implement a 24 by 24 with actually a more efficient MCU with a 3 MMIC only. The cost would be comparable. So that's exactly the pain point we're trying to solve actually from the low level, from the semiconductors level. So we want to actually not doing with a brute force by just adding the number of channels. We want to actually have the higher of channels without adding actually the cost or without significantly adding the cost, at the same time without actually adding the power consumption. And this is something, of course, has to be enabled by semiconductors, like what we're doing with our next generation chipset. I hope this answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. But on the other hand, also the MCU side, yeah? Because I think that so in the future, the domain controller or central computing is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And
I'm also happy that, so the question for those online, the question is that, you still need MCU and the domain controller in the future will become very powerful. What do you do with MCU? Let me actually make one comment here. I appreciate the question. You need to do the processing, right? Whether this is left pocket, right pocket. You have to do that. Yes. Okay. So now there is actually a very important topic. I think this topic has been very much discussed, at least in the European and US space in the last 3 years. Not much in China yet. And then the Chinese OEM thinking differently. They treat actually the powerful HPC as if it costs nothing. But that's not true. Very important is how efficient is this processing unit to do a certain job. The radar processing is very unique. You need to have dedicated accelerators. And don't expect that moving actually the processing from a dedicated radar processing to a general purpose HPC will do things cheaply. No, it will not. At least this is the stand today, right? Things may change in the next years. But I think it's a very good question.
thank you.
Sure.
Hi, thanks a lot for the presentation. Andras here from Perceive AI. I would connect to this same question, but from the perception side. That where do you see the perception happening with these more and more powerful MCUs? Is it staying on the radar, moving out? And if it's moving out, is it ADC data or point cloud data?
It's a very good question, and I think there's no unique answer to that. Where does the perception take place depends on which regions and which OEMs. And I can share with you that in Europe, and I think in the US, the perception will take place in the central place. But in China, the situation is slightly different. The Chinese OEMs actually doesn't have that much experience with how to deal with the radar point cloud. They know how to deal with the LiDAR point cloud. So they actually are asking suppliers to do the perception in the radar. And this is what happened, I think, with the entry-image radar sensor that I just discussed. And things may change, but I think in the long term, perception makes sense to do that in the central place where you would also then be close to the fusion with other sensing technologies.
Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Okay, so we are short on time. Thank you very much for a question. Maybe can I just make one last question?
Yeah.
So very interesting. In the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the peculiarities, for example, from China, from EU, European Union, and also United States. A question that I have is basically, do you know why is this graph like it is? Is this maybe because, I don't know, the society is more readily, maybe in China or the EU, to accept the new technology? Maybe it's from requirements that are coming from the authorities. Why is this graph like this? Do you know about it?
You mean you mean actually why do we see now the divergent requirements from different market? Yeah, I think it's again a different mentality, a mindset in the Chinese OEMs. I mean the Chinese OEMs competition is so fiercely. I think we have never probably experienced here in Europe. And I think under that actually large context, the Chinese OEMs are trying all possible ways to differentiate. One of is that I definitely sense that they are much more actually willing even to sometimes take risks, to try things out. If things doesn't work, I just revert back. I can give an example, right? LiDAR had actually a hype in China in the past years, but this year or end of last year, we're here, after the first production of cars on the road for 3 years, OEMs start to understand LiDAR is not as good as they have expected, despite of the cost, right? And I think they are more actually willing to embrace actually the new technologies, and with that, they want to differentiate, and with that, they want to actually then have less actually cost pressure through that differentiation.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you very much for your presentation. Please, a bit of applause.
Thanks a lot.